The world watched in astonishment as Sheikh Hasina Wajid, the longest-serving Prime Minister of Bangladesh, abruptly resigned and fled into exile. Her departure marked the end of an era. For over 2 decades, Hasina had been the face of Bangladesh on the global stage. The military, which has loomed large in the background of Bangladeshi politics since its inception, has once again stepped into the spotlight. Army Chief Waqar-uz-Zaman, now at the helm of an interim government, has promised fresh elections and a return to civilian rule. However, skepticism runs deep. The world is watching closely, waiting to see if Bangladesh can navigate this turbulent period and emerge as a stable and democratic nation. Sheikh Hasina Wajid's life story is deeply intertwined with the tumultuous history of Bangladesh. Born into a family destined to shape the destiny of a nation, she was the eldest daughter of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, revered as the father of Bangladesh. Mujib, as he was popularly known, led Bangladesh to independence from Pakistan in 1971. Tragically, his life was cut short in 1975 when he was assassinated along with most of his family in a brutal military coup. Hasina and her sister, Sheikh Hasina, were abroad at the time, a twist of fate that spared their lives. This early exposure to the intoxicating mix of power and tragedy left an indelible mark on Hasina. In 1981, she returned to Bangladesh from exile and assumed the leadership of the Awami League, the party her father had founded. For years, a simmering discontent had been brewing beneath the surface of Bangladesh's impressive economic progress. While Hasina's government boasted of remarkable growth rates and poverty reduction, critics argued that the benefits of this prosperity were not reaching ordinary citizens. The cost of living was skyrocketing, unemployment remained stubbornly high, and corruption was rampant. The gap between the rich and the poor was widening, creating a fertile ground for resentment and frustration. Adding fuel to the fire was the government's increasingly authoritarian turn. Opposition voices were stifled, journalists were harassed and intimidated, and human rights activists faced persecution. Student activists, often at the forefront of social movements, began to raise their voices against the government's policies. Their calls for change resonated with a population weary of corruption and yearning for a more equitable society. 2024 dawned with a sense of foreboding in Bangladesh. The economic anxieties that had been festering for years finally boiled over. The spark that ignited the firestorm was a series of large-scale student protests that erupted in the capital, Dhaka, and quickly spread to other parts of the country. What began as a student-led movement quickly morphed into a wider expression of public anger against the Hasina government. The protests, fueled by social media and galvanized by a shared sense of injustice, caught the government off guard. Demands for Hasina's resignation grew louder by the day. The protesters accused her government of corruption, authoritarianism, and economic mismanagement. The government's response to the protests was swift and brutal, pushing the country to the brink. Section 5. The walls close in, a resignation under duress, a flight into exile. As the protests raged on and the death toll mounted, international pressure on the Hasina government began to intensify. The United Nations, the United States, and the European Union all issued statements expressing concern over the violence and calling for restraint. Within Bangladesh, the military, which had remained conspicuously silent in the early days of the protests, began to signal its unease with the government's handling of the crisis. Senior military officials made it clear that they would not tolerate a bloodbath on the streets. Facing mounting pressure from both within and outside the country, Hasina found herself increasingly isolated. Her options were dwindling rapidly. On August 5, 2024, Sheikh Hasina Wajid announced her resignation as Prime Minister of Bangladesh. In a televised address to the nation, she insisted that she was stepping down voluntarily to prevent further bloodshed. Within hours of her resignation, Hasina, accompanied by her immediate family and a handful of loyal aides, boarded a private jet and flew into exile in India. Section 6. The General's Hour, Army Chief Waqar-uz-Zaman assumes control. With Hasina's departure, a palpable sense of uncertainty gripped Bangladesh. Into the vacuum stepped General Waqar-uz-Zaman, the powerful and enigmatic Chief of Army Staff. In a televised address, he announced that the military was taking temporary control of the country to restore order and oversee a peaceful transition of power. Zaman, a career military officer with a reputation for being a shrewd strategist, moved swiftly to consolidate his power. He imposed a nationwide curfew, suspended the constitution, and dissolved parliament. A caretaker government, composed of technocrats and former military officers, was sworn in, with Zaman as its head. The international community reacted cautiously to the military takeover. They urged Zaman to swiftly restore civilian rule and hold free and fair elections. Zaman pledged to hold elections within a year and hand over power to a democratically elected government. Section 7. Echoes of Islamabad and Kabul. The spectre of military rule looms large. The military's intervention in Bangladesh has inevitably drawn comparisons to similar events in neighboring Pakistan and Afghanistan. Both countries have a long and troubled history of military coups and authoritarian rule. Pakistan, since its independence in 1947, has experienced multiple military coups. Afghanistan, similarly, has witnessed a series of coups, revolutions, and foreign interventions, leaving its people yearning for peace and stability. The parallels with Bangladesh are stark. Like Pakistan and Afghanistan, Bangladesh has a history of military intervention in politics. The assassination of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman in 1975 is a stark reminder of the fragility of democracy in the face of military ambition. The international community, wary of the destabilizing effects of military rule, is watching the situation in Bangladesh with a mixture of concern and apprehension. The coming months will be crucial for Bangladesh. Section 8. Delhi watches nervously. A new equation on the subcontinent. The sudden turn of events in Bangladesh has sent ripples of concern through India, its giant neighbor to the west. India, which shares a long and porous border with Bangladesh, has a vested interest in its neighbor's stability and prosperity. The two countries share deep historical and cultural ties. India played a pivotal role in Bangladesh's liberation war in 1971, providing refuge to millions of Bangladeshi refugees and military support to the Mukti Bahini, the Bangladeshi freedom fighters. In recent years, under Sheikh Hasina's leadership, India-Bangladesh relations had reached an all-time high. The two countries had made significant strides in cooperation on a range of issues, including trade, connectivity, security, and water sharing. However, the military takeover in Bangladesh has cast a shadow of uncertainty over the future of bilateral relations. India fears that the instability in Bangladesh could spill over into its own territory, particularly in the restive northeastern states. Section 9. The People's Verdict. From jubilation to apprehension, mixed reactions greet the dawn of a new era. The news of Sheikh Hasina's resignation and the military's subsequent takeover was met with mixed reactions across Bangladesh. On the streets of Dhaka and other major cities, there were scenes of both jubilation and apprehension. Thousands of people, many of whom had participated in the protests that led to Hasina's downfall, poured into the streets to celebrate her departure. They saw it as a victory for democracy and a vindication of their struggle. For them, Hasina's rule had become synonymous with corruption, authoritarianism, and economic inequality. However, not everyone shared this sense of euphoria. Many Bangladeshis, particularly those who had benefited from Hasina's economic policies or who feared a return to instability, viewed the military's intervention with trepidation. Section 10. The Unfinished Revolution. The long road ahead for democracy in Bangladesh. As Bangladesh embarks on a new chapter in its history, the road ahead is fraught with challenges. The military, now the self-appointed custodian of the nation's destiny, faces a daunting task. The most immediate challenge is to restore stability and order. The protests that preceded Hasina's ouster, while largely peaceful, had witnessed sporadic outbreaks of violence. Equally important is the need to address the grievances that fueled the protests in the first place. The economic anxieties, the corruption, the shrinking space for dissent. These are issues that will need to be tackled head-on if Bangladesh is to achieve lasting peace and stability. The military has promised to hold elections within a year and hand over power to a democratically elected government. For democracy to take root and flourish in Bangladesh, the military will need to demonstrate its commitment to genuine democratic values. Section 11. A world watching. Will Bangladesh's promise be fulfilled or betrayed? The world is watching closely as Bangladesh navigates this turbulent period. The stakes are high, not just for Bangladesh but for the entire region. A stable, democratic, and prosperous Bangladesh is in everyone's interest. The international community has a responsibility to support Bangladesh in its quest for democracy. This means providing economic assistance, promoting human rights, and encouraging good governance. However, it also means holding the military accountable for its actions. The people of Bangladesh have shown time and again their resilience and their commitment to democracy. The world is watching, hoping that Bangladesh will emerge from this crisis stronger and more united, a beacon of hope and progress in a region often marred by conflict and instability.